Being very formal, Pat. So good evening and thanks for joining the session today. What we're going to do is obviously look at discussing some of the brief outlines for some of the units for which we are looking at doing an APL. Now, some of these tasks primarily involve you making a PowerPoint presentation. So one of the first discussions that we're going to look at doing today would be to look at discussing the unit which is global talent management. And within that, for the next, maybe 10, 15 odd minutes, what we're going to try and do is go through some of the topics which will kind of, give us some bit of knowledge in terms of your understanding of what do we mean and understand by global talent management. So what I'm going to do is obviously go through some of the slides. I've got a deck of slides here, which is about, 10, 15 slides, but some of them are just headline slides. But what I'm going to do is try and go through some of them. And then within those slides, I'm kind of going through what we would want to do is have a bit of professional discussion to get some application. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the theoretical concepts of which are key to the global talent management as a unit. And within that, I'm looking at covering, a couple of things like the definition, the role of organizations, in terms of global talent management. We will look at, for example, some of the successful benefits, or what are the benefits which the organizations get if they are able to manage talent successfully. But within that, what I'm expecting from your end is to be able to kind of, after the theory, show a bit of practice and application. That means where would you kind of put this into practice from an HR, if you were, say, for example, put on the hat of an HR manager or somebody who works within human resources. The idea would be to try and get an idea of an application, which is nothing but an example to kind of elaborate what we're discussing. Is that okay?
Okay, that's fair enough. Yeah, not a problem.
Yeah, and then that is what will be the format that we will use primarily for this discussion and the two subsequent that we need to do to try and cover this off, and ensure that there's a complete coverage in terms of meeting the criteria for OTHM.
Excellent. That sounds good to me.
Okay, so what I'll do is going on to the presentation. So there are three things that, what we look at. First would be the definition of what we call, or how do we define global talent management. And then that second part that we will look at is look at some of the concepts. And then lastly, what is essentially, key challenges with regards to, talent management in the 21st century.
Yeah, sounds fine to me.
Okay, so let's look at, talent management. Now, I know that we can define talent and management, but when we look at some key definitions of how this has been, looked at from an HR perspective, nowadays it is kind of being defined as a science. That this is more or less looking at understanding the key psyche in terms of how human resources work and how the line managers, or in particular your managers, can actually get getting the best output in terms of efficiency, productivity, performance on certain tasks or roles and responsibilities. So talent management for us is, when we look at this particular module, we define it as more or less a science of understanding, the strategic resources planning. How do we plan human as a resource, or staff or employees as a resource when we treat them as a resource within the business or an organization. What we are looking at is the concept of the planning part of it, which will help us improve the business, or the resource or the staff that we are talking about actually ending up adding value to the business from that perspective. And here, when we look at tasks and responsibilities, when we look at a job description in particular, we look at roles and responsibilities, and they getting converted into something called tasks. What we are looking at is how these resources, can be effectively channelized to achieve those tasks, and in the short term, achieve those goals and objectives. And then in the long run, when we look at a financial year, when we look at a full year or a cycle for the organization, how do they help in contributing or helping to achieve the organizational goals. And within that, what we look at this, particular matrix, which we basically use, in which we try and kind of, let's put it this way. This is a McKinsey's model, wherein a lot of research which is done in the background. And what they've looked at is when they published this book called The War of Talent in 2001, what they did was they basically came up with this concept of how, a resource, in particular employees, staff as resource, can be put together into something called the integrated, talent management system, which allows them to create efficiency within the organization. So they look at each and every aspect of how employee can actually be managed, in terms of, from the time the employee joins the organization, and even before, when they join the organization, there's a bit of planning which goes in on the recruitment and selection side, and that is where the key aspects or attributes of why this vacancy is being created, or what will the person will actually look at in terms of his job description, day-to-day activities, have been taken into mind. So the pre part, which is before they join the organization, and the post part, which is the major part of the construct in terms of the 80-20 or 70-30 part of the construct, looks at, how they can actually manage their performance, look at keeping them motivated, and then look at also a bit of career planning or career, continuous professional development, as we call it, through the route of training and development. And then when they reach a particular level, which is looking at the middle management, how then can succession planning, or people then getting into coaching and mentoring roles to be able to undertake senior positions within the organization, and then the development of capability to kind of augment certain gap areas in leadership are looked at, and that is where the whole aspect of this integrated talent management actually seems to work. So modern day organizations, this particular matrix is very central to understanding how the HR function works. And to a certain extent, in large organizations, the ones that we look at, the millennial organizations, which are the likes of Facebook, LinkedIn, wherein they work, say for example, the manpower or the resources working within the organization are quite distributed. There is a bit of diversity in the culture. And to a certain extent, what we do get to see is, because of the large, size of the workforce which HR is managing, there needs to be a specific person, or a person which kind of specializes in managing the aspect of, this particular resource, is what we look at the implementation of this model. So they are looking at managing the talent, expectation, performance, rewards, and also to a certain extent their career path within the organizations.
Yeah.
Now, so my question to you now is, when we look at briefly the two things that we've discussed, like for example, the definition of talent management, and when we look at this particular, which is more or less talking about the talent management, how it happens within the organization, can you look at giving us an example of how this has been put into practice, or is that something that you've done in the past, which can be correlated with an example to elaborate this particular discussion that we're doing?
Yeah, so at the moment, as a management consultant, I work with several organisations who are involved in strategic planning for the business.
Sure.
And part of that is making sure they identify the types of skills and roles they need to fill. Part of that, so the idea is it's linked to the organisation strategy and the core strategic plan for the next year, 3 years, looking at how best to source the candidates, whether or not it's in-house, existing staff or resources in-house, or whether it's best to get those resources from external sources. Obviously, there's pros and cons to both, but there's a bit of there's a school of thought that when a lot of organisations think of talent management, they think of it solely as a sort of high flyer scheme for those people that are going to excel into senior positions fairly rapidly. Whereas if you're looking at an inclusivity perspective and looking at the diversity of a workforce, it's often best to integrate global talent management or talent management generally within the organisational development and HR development process and training and learning plans for the organisation as a whole. So there's a clear path for people to develop as the business develops, and rather than just seeing what talent management is something that people come in at high level and just develop in senior roles very quickly. So effectively, the clients I work with often ask us to help them identify the sort of skill sets, the people they might need to develop and deliver parts of the business or the key strategic plan for the next 2 or 3 years, and with a view to thinking about where they can source those candidates. That's what they want them within the organisation in place. There's also so always looking at leaders in the future and make sure you've got the selection. You're still not very best. I think best kinds of most important they need. It's about
Right, okay, that's fine.
You happy with that? Yeah.
Yeah, that's okay. Slightly when obviously you're talking, so I'm just wanting to be sure that in terms of, can you think of something that you've used in the past, or for example, if I know that you've described this the process, but in terms of your current work experience, have you come across or have you put this across in an organization that you can name and give us an example of, in terms of the 3 activities which would have been undertaken by say for example a person in the HR field to kind of manage talent within that organization? An example that I would give here, say for example, would be if you look at large organizations like Carillion, which has just recently gone into administration, what we would see in this whole process as well, when PwC has been invited as administrators to look after the process of winding up operations, their key role and their key objectives outlined by the government have been a couple of objectives, but the 2 or 3 that we can significantly look at this moment, which are in the news, are one, that they are looking at, for example, making sure that the existing contract which currently they are working on, and they are specifically related to public sector contracts, they've been asked to ensure that those organizations which are involved in that side of the delivery are taken as a priority, so that those businesses are able to deliver those public sector contracts. The second thing that they've done in that objective is they've clearly said people who are employed or were employed as third-party contractors will continue to be paid from an aspect, even if the company is not able to pay them, to continue the services. And the third thing that they highlighted was that employers or people who are directly kind of contracted with Carillion on ongoing contracts will continue to be paid even after the work has been finished for a period of 3 months till this comes to a. So what they've effectively done in that, as an example that I'm quoting right now, is that they have looked at managing some key problems which are very focused to the approach of kind of not allowing or basically preventing the core structure of the organization to fail, wherein their delivery is directly related to public sector contracts to be on the first priority. So this is an example of PwC stepping in, maybe doing a bit of an advisory to the government, specifically related to the areas wherein they feel that if this is allowed to go into administration and if they lay off people or make them redundant, then this will lead to loss of positions, but not only loss of position, but loss of work and loss of money directly to the taxpayer. So can you think of an example like that? You can give me some example, which basically covers at least, the 2 or 3 aspects of, looking at the talent management process, specifically within a company.
Okay, so I work with a housing association in East London who's recently set up a direct labour organisation. So they've brought back in-house the repairs and maintenance services that are traditionally done by external providers. The key requirements for doing that are either it's going to be more responsive to tenant needs, and also secondly, because it's going to be more cost effective in the long run for them to deliver those services in-house. They've got more control and the ability to control when jobs have been completed, manage their financial budgets better, and also be able to develop a team of people that can have some multi-trade skill sets. So they've got a diverse workforce of skill sets that they can start to deliver more sort of services in terms of plans and cyclical decorations. But when I was involved with the organisation, we were looking at what the key objectives of bringing the direct labour organisation within the umbrella of the main business were. Looking at identifying the skill sets they need to deliver both the implementation and setup of the service, and then longer term whether they're going to get the operational and supervisory staff in to start managing the service. We're looking at planning two distinct phases. There's going to be set up and sort of implementation of the service, such as getting people on board to set up processes, the help desk, train the help desk staff, set up the job flow management systems. So we delivered that by using temporary staff with skill sets within those particular specialist areas. And the second phase that was run concurrently with that was recruiting an operations manager that could set strategic management function within in that part of the business, recruiting some key supervisors to work with him, and also the operations team to be able to come on board and deliver the services at the front line. Part of that was identifying an onboarding process for quite a number of operatives, 60 at a time, in 4 phases, and looking to develop an induction onboarding program which not only integrated them within the business fairly quickly, got their core mandatory training set up, an issue of tools and kit, also meant that we were able to start delivering services in a phased program rather than get, say, 250 people starting at once. We started to get certain aspects of the business running at a time, so we started with very basic plumbing and electrical repairs, then we went on to decorating, and then more infrastructure projects after that. Part of that, yeah, was that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. Absolutely. I think spot on. So I think in that bit what you've explained to us, I can understand that this is something that you've kind of put into practice, and this is good enough at least for looking at covering that criteria. Now, very briefly, going on to the second aspect. Now, one of the key things that we look at, just following up with the same example that I've given earlier, but I'm going to try and change and give you another example, would be when we look at succession planning within the organization. Now, this is normally a process wherein we look at identifying or potentially developing new leaders who will kind of come in and replace the old one or the existing management, which is either retiring or sometimes we get to hear words like we need fresh kind of direction coming into the management team, and that succession planning actually becomes important. And what we have seen is, to a large extent within the organization, the research actually points out that we normally get to say, and I'm going to read this out from the slide. It says research shows that outstanding performers typically deliver 4 to 6 times more on performance than average people who have actually been rising through the ranks within the organization and are normally deemed as, normally seen as fit individuals to take the management help. But this is now increasingly being challenged in the 21st century organizations, because they look at fresh ideas, they look at lateral tangent ideas, and sometimes most companies, when they are looking at appointing, let's put it this way, people at the senior-most level, chief executive officer, or the CFO level, they tend to go outside the organization to look at bringing somebody in to look at succession planning. Now, this can be done in different ways. Succession planning also kind of alters the culture and the structure of the organization to a certain extent, because if they look at external recruitment, people normally come in with different style of leadership, different style of management. But in general, what we do see is this is also one of the key aspects when we look at a lot of startup organizations in particular, and when we look at organizations wherein there is a large number of workforce, we do see that succession planning at some point in time starts as a process within the HR department, then strategically follows into the board level, the senior level, and upwards to board. Now, the point that we are going to look at is an example here that I would probably quote, very recent again, of Oxfam. What we do see, because of the recent scandal which is kind of unearthed, we've seen a lot of resignations which will primarily happen within the organization. So here, the organization has to have a bit of a readiness. Now, they couldn't see this coming, by any angle. Now, this has been a very sudden burst in terms of the revelations which have happened, or because of the undercover activity, whatever it is. But at some point in time, an organization as large as Oxfam would have done some sort of succession planning within, within the organization. That if this is to happen, this is where HR departments or people working within, again, specializing in managing resources, look at is that they have to step into it, into the role, and they have to look at now doing a bit of succession planning in terms of, okay, what's the way forward? Where do we go from here, and how do we go from here? Point A to point B. So here, what we look at is, some of the key characteristics again coming in terms of how succession planning is actually done within organizations, and this is done, from an aspect of looking at a lot of things. Now, if you've been within the organization, what tends to happen is a lot of your background in terms of performance, the goals and objectives that you've achieved, in terms of what your knowledge and experience is, how you've built up competencies over the years, and how you're performing overall in terms of your role and your loyalty towards the organization is all looked at. Now, at some stage when you become a leader or a manager in a leadership position, what you tend to do is you tend to look at maximizing productivity and efficiency from the same set of people that you work with time and again. So sometimes you will see within large organizations there's a bidding which tends to happen on projects. And when the bidding happens, they tend to give that across to that particular side of team or that performing team within the organization, which has kind of set benchmarks in the past or has been able to achieve the objectives set by the management. So succession planning constitutes of, looking at overall 360 measures in terms of, understanding from the very ground rules of, looking at employee performance, how they stack up within, in terms of their skill set, their previous experience, and last but not the least, how they've performed over the years within the organization. Now here, what we want to look at in particular is, can you pick up one particular, the key bit which is highlighted? Say, for example, if you pick up knowledge and communication sharing, how do you think this contributes towards succession planning within an organization?
Well, from the point of view of knowledge and in communications and knowledge sharing, obviously, we never know what's going to happen in the future. So part of the organisation's business continuity disaster recovery programme, it's good for people to know what other colleagues do if they're off sick or similar. Being able to access information for sort of organisations, different members of the team, is important to be able to maintain continuity of service for other organisations and clients. But also in terms of, I work in a management consultancy, so it's really important I have access to knowledge and experience of colleagues on a regular basis, so I can start to put together services based on past experiences with the team, so that I can deliver a service that A, is relevant to the client, and B, means that it's something I know we can deliver. And so in terms of better knowledge and communication, knowledge sharing, things like having a buddy system where people get to know other people's jobs, encouraging people to get to other parts of the business, so going on shadowing or opportunities so people can get a wide understanding of the organisation as a whole rather than just a small team they work within. That encourages people to be more collaborative. It encourages people to see the other sides of the business where they can maybe develop their skill set further. So when other opportunities come up, they can maybe go for that. And if people have a wider knowledge of the business and the organisation, how it works and the roles operate, it means that the organisation is going to be a lot more resilient should the worst happen. And also it gives the organisation the ability to grow quickly if there is the need to for commercial growth or delivery of more services. People feel part of the organisation and therefore they're more willing to go above and beyond, and they buy into the concept they're part of the culture and what's happening there, rather than just one member of the team sat in an office that just does their work and their work only. So that would increase productivity, it builds some motivation, it helps people develop as individuals and grow with the team, and also it helps organisations understand where they've got pockets of skill sets or different types of skills or people with experience or language abilities or regional resources they can use to basically increase productivity and financial profitability.
That's fine. So in terms of each of these, factors actually, as you rightly said, contribute towards, and they cannot be looked at. So they contribute towards the longer term succession planning, but each of these cannot be looked in isolation, because you cannot have somebody go into that position who is not a good communicator or is not having enough knowledge, wherein he or she is not able to get into a coaching or a mentoring position. So each of these essential cogs will not, they will not be alone enough for somebody to look at. Okay, we sometimes when we look at talking about, somebody within the organization, we see, okay, he's a great guy, he does this, he does that, he's a go-getter, loves challenges, is able to communicate well, gets on with the team. That might not be alone enough for that person to be shortlisted or put onto some sort of a talent management program. And here organizations look at more or less an overall objective of how you are, kind of attached to the organization, loyalty factors, motivation, as you rightly mentioned, knowledge, workability within a team, and then obviously the key aspect of looking at how they are able to achieve, goals and objectives as and when they are given. Now, the last bit that we want to look at briefly would be to understand, some of the global challenges which most organizations are facing when they look at managing people. Now, we do get to see a lot of people actually leaving the organization, headhunted, from various organizations, and you know that a lot of these large companies, when we talk about most of the American, European companies, they sign contracts wherein they do not look at taking employees, or hiring employees from one another. And in some cases, because, let's put it this way, employees are the most important resource for organizations which which have products and services which are primarily deemed as intellectual property. That is where we get to see a lot of these agreements and kind of pacts which tend to happen. Now, some of the ones that are very popular, and obviously in my knowledge, are the ones which are between Google, Yahoo. We look at Microsoft, Apple. Some of these companies based in the Silicon Valley have these kind of contracts in place which do not allow an employee working within the organization to kind of end up leaving and then joining the other competitor or the organization for about 6 months to a year. And in some cases, when you're in very senior positions, this could mean that you probably are, signing into a dotted line or a contract wherein you do not end up joining the competitor even after a year or 18 months in terms of leaving the organization. Now, the challenge, this is an area where most organizations now have challenges because they are trying to attract the brightest, the best talent coming into the organization, which will help them move forward, increase profitability, shareholder value, gain market share. So depending on the area that you are going to be employed in, this is a major challenge because most organizations are looking at benchmarking and then looking at wages and salaries, and also looking at attracting the best possible talent to come in and take the organization forward. Now, when we look at that, what we look at is we again go back to the basics in terms of looking at how do we define talent, and then we kind of look at this particular chart or a picture, as we would say, wherein we look at some of the guiding principles of what are the key factors which are looked at when organizations actually look at dealing with these challenges. So, for example, over the years, a lot of these practice firms like Ernst & Young, KPMG, PricewaterhouseCoopers, they've come up with lots of models which kind of define how the management of key personnel within the organization needs to be done, and it to a certain extent also looks at managing their expectation. Now, with that, what they've done is when we looked at the first, global management cycle, talent management cycle, what we looked at was that these were the cogs in that particular cycle. So we looked at things like recruitment, rewards, compensation, training and development, and some of the things which basically look at workforce planning. Now, taking that a bit further, when we look at challenges, what we are looking at is within the aspect of managing expectation of an employee or a person working within a role, what we need to look at is the key factors of retention, compensation and reward. So you could find two people or a couple of managers working in sales and in a particular area, but they have different territories and different managers might be on a different bonus structure. So when we look at that, again here the compensation and sorry. So here we look at compensation and rewards being very different for somebody who is managing a larger territory but getting a large turnover or sales, but somebody who's managing a very competitive territory might be still on a smaller target but getting more bonus or more incentives. So compensation and reward is used as one of the key tools now within certain functions. So when we look at business development, sales, marketing, this seems to be the biggest motivator when it comes to solving challenges in the organization for setting expectations. Now, to a certain extent, there is something called talent review, which has also now come up. So how do we review talent? If you say that you are the best or you are the best of the best in terms of within an organization, you win something like an Employee of the Month award or Employee of the Year award, then how do we set benchmarks within organizations? How do we set policies? One of the key areas which HR is now looking at in large organizations is they're having to constantly look at rewriting some of the documents which basically define the management of talent and how talent is reviewed. And to a certain extent, the part that we discussed, which is recruitment and selection and development and training, they kind of augment the management talent within the organization. So they also play a very key role. So a person within a junior management, frontline sales might have a different training requirement throughout the year than a person working within the middle management or having responsibility of managing people. Then a person who's working at the senior level or a CXO level would have different requirements of training. So these things are put together in a context of aligning, giving support and guidance, but aligning it to the requirement basis their hierarchy, the structure and the culture of the organization. Now, when you look at challenges, so the whole unit of the module actually focuses on managing talent within the organization. But a key example that I would kind of give here would be that when we look at traditional IT companies like Dell, HP, which have undergone a large scale restructuring, both at the senior management board level and also at the micro level, which is basically divisional or, spread across different geographies and continents. Now, what we do get to see is that these companies have reinvented because of the changing business models, the growth of e-commerce, and the ability of the consumer to be able to kind of compare and reference and get dynamic pricings of products internationally or globally. These companies had to restructure a lot of their business and their business models. And because of the restructuring happening at that level, they went through the whole process of also reviewing the key resources required to run the company and its operation. And that is where they faced the challenge of, how do we look at retaining the best, and the ones which are obviously not in line with the goals which have been set again by the organization. They had to let these, let the staff go. So they had to make large-scale redundancies. Now, the challenge that we talk about is primarily looking at, if I expand that further, we look at basically a couple of things in terms of it starts off from vision, mission, which has been redefined, getting into goals and objectives, and then a business plan, which is done geography-wise or, a division-wise, product-wise, whatever it is, and then getting down to the nitty-gritty of rewriting job roles, descriptions, and how they will be benchmarked again in terms of looking at achievement. And that is where this particular model that we look at, the 8-step model, comes in, when they look at integrating the objectives, even up starting from the mission, vision level, down to the nitty-gritty of the day-to-day activities, so that the whole organization actually moves in that direction to achieve what has been set out by the board or by the management. So here, when we look at these points, what we talk about is HR does its usual workforce planning throughout for the year or 3 years, 5 years. There's a lot of recruitment which goes on as an activity. You get them on board, and then once they're on board, they're settled, they go through that probation period, and once you're confirmed as an employee, then the whole process of performance management actually begins. So appraisal, look at certain techniques through which we do performance appraisals, like the balanced scorecard. The scorecard that we look at. We look at some organizations use management by objectives, MBOs, and all these tools and techniques are then used at some stage with the support of training and development, compensation and benefits, rewards management, incentive trips, whatever you call it, seminars, training talks, and then performance appraisals, picking up the gap areas, and then accordingly going back to step 5, putting into training, putting into development, and then giving the employee again a chance to perform and perform well, and then achieve the objectives. Now, what do you think, considering this particular cycle of what the human resources planning goes through, starting from recruitment, then confirmation within the organization, and then you getting on with your job responsibilities from a modern day context? What do you think will be the challenges in organizations that we've just discussed, the 21st century organizations?
So in terms of getting people on board and onboarding, if you're looking at a global organisation, it's difficult to get everybody in one place at one time to get the sort of people all integrated into the organisation, get them buy-in, understand what the organisation's culture is about. So it's even more important to make sure that where there are people working remotely, potentially working in isolation, potentially there's a cultural aspects and differences across the organisation. It's really important that people who are managing people at a local level have the same culture and beliefs and vision as everyone else in the business. It could get lost in translation a little bit depending on sort of local cultural issues or language barriers, that sort of thing. So those sort of things could be quite key. Also, the supply and demand of certain talent in certain areas and skill sets is more difficult to come by than others. So looking at kind of identifying where you might need additional staff or additional resources, and looking to try and make sure that you are making the most of those people wherever you are. So effectively, sometimes it's more difficult to get someone into the sort of head office of the organisation, say in Europe, if they come from somewhere that's very different culturally. That might be counterproductive. Although you think you're going to bring them into the business head office and start to integrate them and make them buy into business, it might be counterproductive, because by bringing them out of their comfort zone and starting a new job at the same time, you might not retain them as long as you might do in terms of when you kind of recruit them locally, have them managed by local managers that know the business, know the organisations, know how to manage performance. Effectively, it's more important to have people that in management roles understand the business, who can effectively manage across the globe rather than just managing people centrally. So there's key country management roles that are quite important in certain areas, and also looking at the challenges around people could be acting of their own initiative and for their own. If people are working remotely and spread across the globe, there's the potential for people to go off message, start to act in their own interest. So they might start to sort of do things their way for their own reasons rather than for the good of the business. So it's challenging, but with remote working and IT and technology, that can be improved. But I don't know if I'm going off here a little bit. Most importantly is clearly defining what you want people to do. Having people that can manage people either locally or globally, that understand how to manage people across the globe, and make sure the key standards are being maintained, and making sure the recruitment process not only identifies the sort of technical skills or ability or professional qualifications someone needs, but also they have a good cultural fit for the business, to understand the net sector, and they're likely to be sort of happy with the organisation rather than just joining because someone has a master's degree in marketing. It has to fit the business model as well as the culture and the technical skills.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, I think some of the points that you've kind of mentioned, I would probably just pick out some of the golden nuggets on that. Which meaning, I think when you say large organization, yes, I've also said large organization, but when we talk about companies which are across geographies or across various countries, what we look at is they always struggle to bring in uniform culture, some sort of a uniform culture across the organization, because they're dealing with different cultures, people working within, or from different cultures, coming from different backgrounds, diverse backgrounds, and that kind of sets out one of the challenge, which is a 21st century challenge. The other thing that look at is, even when we look at most HR departments do have what you call clear policies and procedures in place to define when this person will actually be promoted, what is the criteria for you to meet in the performance appraisal to get a promotion, or to get a raise in salary. But I think when we look at succession planning and career progression within organizations, this is sometimes still seen as a function which is gender biased to a certain extent. And that is why we talk about things like, within the UK, only 15% of women are on the board of companies. And, the pay gender gap, which was recently highlighted in BBC by Carrie Gracie's resignation, we do see things like these, which are, challenges wherein they are trying to maintain and manage the talent. So two different editors, John Sobel, America, and we look at Carrie Gracie, China, two most important countries from which BBC reports, but one getting paid, far higher than the one, covering the second largest or the second most largest economy. So I think when we look at gender gap and, managing expectations on that side, that's a key challenge. There are some of the other things that we also look at, which, as you rightly pointed out, which is implementation. I think you alluded to the fact that implementation, when sometimes these policies and procedures are actually implemented within organizations, you do see that they have a different set criteria for implementation across different geographies, which then tends to create, again, some sort of a discriminatory atmosphere, which is becoming, or which does in some cases, difficult for the HR directors or HR managers to, kind of manage. So these are there are lots of challenges, but the idea is we wanted to cover to try and understand what are the key challenges that some of the people who work within this field could end up facing, depending on the size and the, type of organization they are working in. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop here for today. And I think that bit of discussion that we've done, covering some of the tasks, that I've sent you on the email, it helps us, kind of address those the key tasks, in terms of the criteria for assessment. One last thing, which I would kind of, very briefly talk about, or want to, kind of have covered in the conversation, is the fact that, do you think mobility, or what is the role of mobility, global mobility as far as, talent management is concerned? What is the role of global mobility?
Well, in terms of individuals or organizations?
I think in terms of individuals in particular.
So the importance of it is, effectively, you've got, if people can be more globally mobile, are likely to be able to experience different things, work in different cultures, work in different sectors. Also, global mobility, if you've got particular skill sets which are more predominant in one country than another, you can get a sort of a tap into a sort of really source of people or supply of skills that you might not be able to get in that sort of particular area of the world or the country. Obviously, if you can get people to travel around the world and have different experiences and work in different organisations and different cultures, then that makes them a more rounded individual, and therefore more able to manage people from different cultures and backgrounds in the future. So if you're looking at someone that's experienced a global perspective, they're more likely to understand and be able to manage someone from a different area of the world more effectively and standardise how the approaches to sort of corporate policy and application are managed.
I think that's absolutely relevant. That's fine. But I think when we look at it from an organizational perspective, what I was trying to refer to was the fact that when you look at large organizations and you look at managing resources within those large organizations, what we do get to see sometimes is, in order to look at succession planning, in order to look at managing expectations, and also to manage, look at a differential reward management. What we do get to see is large organizations, when you look at, say, for example, we look at Fujitsu Siemens in Europe. Now, a lot of these organizations do transfer their employees from one location to the other. And that is now coming to the point which you've highlighted, is that if they go into different cultures, different locations, they are able to experience cultures, manage and work with different people, diverse set of people, and which helps them grow overall in their role, and also as an individual in terms of, kind of preparing them to take a larger responsibility. So I think one of the key things that I was referring to, you've addressed. It's okay. And in terms of when you look at, large organizations in particular. Now, this could be a part and parcel of a small organization as well within the UK. When we look at something like, say, a construction business, when we look at, say, for example, Taylor Wimpey, just as an example, they have lots of sites on which new houses or new developments are coming up. And the project managers within these organizations are given the opportunity to go and project manage, different developments. And this helps them get that experience, and also gets them to, kind of gain certain skills which they ordinarily would not have in the current role if they had been stationed in a particular location. We get to see this happening in a lot of banks, where we see a lot of consultants, specifically in the merchant side of banking, merchant banking or investment banking. We do see a lot of individuals get the opportunity to take transfers or go across and work in different locations, to be able to develop business, network, and obviously grow in their roles. So yes, I think one of the key things that we are both saying, yes, there is a definite role of mobility or transfers, as we call them, within the organizations for individuals to be rewarded, and also have the opportunity to be able to develop, experience, understand, and work with diverse cultures and diverse set of people to kind of bring about overall development within that individual for growth, and obviously taking up senior roles.
One of my clients who works in the health and safety sector, what I've done with them is they've got consultants that work as health and safety consultants on construction projects, and they require them to go and experience working in Saudi, for example, where they experience sort of very hot weather, dusty environments, difficult climates. They can understand how to manage those safely, and then they'll go and do a project in the Arctic so they can experience the polar opposite in terms of icy weather conditions. So they're building up a sort of a bank of skills within their organisation. They can deploy consultants around the world whenever they need to for different types of projects.
Yep, that's absolutely fine. So I think, Matt, this helps us cover that bit of, some of the bits which have got left out in this particular unit. I'm quite happy with the discussion we have had, and not a problem with that. And I think what we're going to do is obviously follow this up with the second one, which we will try and do more or less the same time tomorrow. Now, with regards to our discussion on Friday, I think we'll have to push that back slightly, keeping in mind, keeping in mind some. Let me put it this way. There's another session that I have, which I've kind of overlooked, and I think we'll end up doing that slightly late, which is about 7ish, or between 7 and 7.
So I thought they were all going to be today.
No. This is the first one, which is just the unit, which is Global Talent Management.
So I had it in my head we were doing them all today because you had your EV in tomorrow. No,
the EV is going to have a look at your work once we've done these sessions. So we're not having the EV coming in on Friday. The EV is going to be with us on Monday.
Right, okay. Well, to be honest with you, I was expecting it to be done today because tomorrow I'm going to Chester. So at this time tomorrow I'll be on the train up to Warrington.
Sure. Okay, we can push this back slightly in terms of the time, or we can have a combined discussion on this on Friday, if that suits you. Right. The reason of sending you 3 emails and 3 invites are primarily looking at 3 different sessions to cover,
So I didn't see the 3 different days, so I just assumed it was all going in tomorrow for the EQA. I'm going to have another look at this then, because I'm travelling to Chester tomorrow evening. I'm in Chester all day tomorrow, and then I'm travelling back late on Friday.
Right. Okay. Just to make you aware, I've sent out 3 invites to you. So today was Global Talent Management. Tomorrow's invite is Managing and Coordinating Human Resources, and the one on Friday is primarily covering various. So there are 1 or 2 tasks, 1 or 2 places that we need to cover. So that invite primarily is, looking at the third one. So assuming if you're not able to do the one tomorrow, then we will try and do it combined on a Friday, if that's okay.
No, that's what I'm saying to you, because I'm out with clients. Okay. So I'm travelling up tomorrow evening. I'm with clients all day in Chester on Friday, and I'm travelling back to my home Friday evening. So the 2 evenings we're going to be travelling backwards and forwards up and down the country, and I won't have a reliable internet connection.
Right, okay.
And I won't be getting back home on Friday until at least 10 o'clock, because I'm not booked on the train from Warrington until 5:30 in the evening on Friday.
Okay, and what about Saturday?
What sort of time are you thinking on Saturday? Because I've got some family commitments in the morning and the early afternoon, but potentially could do. Have a quick look.
What about Monday then? Let's look at Monday.
Hold on, let me look at my calendar, because I think Monday again. Because every day of the week I'm with a different client, so it depends how far I've got to travel. But bear with me. Sunday's the 19th. Okay. Is it Monday the 19th we're talking about?
Yep.
Okay. I should be back home fairly early in the afternoon on Monday the 19th, so I could do 3 o'clock.
Okay, that's fine. What I'll do is I'll send you out an invite, for Monday.
That's fine. We'll be able to do the next two ones.
Try and cover this up, both of them together.
Excellent, that would be great. Sorry, I just totally misread those calendar invites. I can see you've sent them out now